I think they're wrong. I think their action is wrong. I think, I particularly think about the images we've seen of ambulances coming down the road and not being able to get through because people have glued themselves to the road. Fiona, my mum was very ill all of her life. She was in those ambulances when she was alive, and there'll be other families listening to this who are in the same situation. I think it's arrogant. It's arrogant. Now,
I think what Keir Starmer needs to understand is that, he can be a fan of law and order. He can want to form a government that, upholds law and order. But there is no law and order. There is no, authority in a state of which we've deteriorated so much as a society as a result of things like crop failure, which means food shortages, which means conflict. There is no law and order in a world like that, where people are, entering conflict to try and get their family food as a result of food shortages. Half of our potato crops are expected to fail this year. Half of our, I think it's 2/3 of our wheat crops have already failed this year. Food shortages are already happening. What's that going to look like in 2050, let alone, what we're seeing now? I think Keir Starmer needs to come to terms with that. I think he needs to understand the seriousness of this threat. I think he needs to do that. Especially if he gets into government, is to commit to young people like myself and young people throughout this country and the world that he's going to protect their futures, and that he's going to put policy in place that ensures that those people have a world to live in that isn't filled with conflict caused by the climate crisis. I don't think asking for universal care and a policy which is ultimately going to protect the people of the country he loves so much is arrogant in any way. I think, from what we understand his policies to be, we do agree with Keir Starmer and his policies with regards to no new oil licenses. We do support those policies. They are good policies for what we understand them to be. But I think what Keir Starmer's forgetting is the 200 years of Labour history. Labour was literally founded on those who broke the societal norms to stand up for their own, their workers' rights. And that's what Keir Starmer's forgetting here. People right now are in civil resistance against a morally bankrupt government, and Keir Starmer seems to be, in a way, standing with the government on this. And you can understand he wants to be seen as a government in waiting. He wants to appease voters. But I think when it comes to appeasing voters versus protecting, everything that we hold dear in society, I think the choice is very clear. And I think that, we welcome his policies with regards to oil licenses, but he needs to stand with the British people, and he needs to stand with those who are, asking for the government to get on with that job. I think Keir Starmer is kind of failing to see I don't think he's failing to see what the situation we're in, but it's clear to all. There's nurses going on strike at the moment. I think that proves the level of madness we're currently in. And when we've got nurses going on strike, and when we look to the future, the climate crisis is the biggest threat to our health services, and it's the biggest health crisis waiting to happen. Well, we've got one simple demand. It's that the government, they end all new oil and gas. And it's a demand that's kind of been, echoed by those in the IPCC, the International Energy Agency, the UN. It's a very it's a very proportionate demand, considering what the planet and the people of this world face if we don't get off fossil fuels and we don't start to wean off them. And that's kind of what Just Stop Oil are demanding here, and it's that the government completely end all new oil and gas and they start that transition away from it. Well, we've seen, and I'm sure you'll be able to agree with this, over the past decade or so, people have been, standing with placards and, writing letters and lobbying, and the media, it's not very media worthy, and the media don't want to cover it. It's not really, it's not going to be on the front pages. And I think from the perspective of Just Stop Oil, this is such an urgent thing that we need to get resolved, that the disruption has to be caused. And it was the same with the civil rights movement in America. It was the same with the women's suffrage movement. Both of these, these issues and these people campaigning against these issues have been going for decades and decades. And the truth is, in this situation, we don't have decades. We have a short window. And Sir David King, the former chief scientific advisor to the government, said we have 3 to 4 years to determine the future of humanity. And it's very kind of spooky words there.
Mm.
And we don't have the time frame to go, stand with placards and get no media coverage. We need the media to report on this. It's a really, really, really critical issue. And that's why, we've seen the disruption happening, because it cuts through that kind of media block, and it puts pressure on the government to respond. We've already had secretaries of state, name check us. We've had Keir Starmer name check us. We've had all of these different types of people name check us, and it proves that we are getting onto the agenda, and that we're getting, a ban on new fossil fuels onto the agenda as well. Well, I think a lot of the public do support the demand of no fossil fuels. They might not support the methods which are being employed, but it's quite understandable that people are angry when they see disruption. We're in a time where we've had this same government in for 12 years, which is really making people feel the pinch. We've got austerity at an all-time high. The government aren't solving the cost of living crisis. They're standing with the £1 billion, oil barons. They're refusing to tax them. The government is standing with the wrong people, and putting people in a situation like that is understandably going to make people feel the pinch. And so we can understand why the disruption does make people angry. And I think, like I said, people do support the demand of no fossil fuels, but it is awful when I see the roadblocks and when I've caused a disruption myself. It is awful that this disruption has to be caused. And I think my message, and Just Stop Oil's message to the government, the public, the media, is that as soon as the government make that decision that they are going to protect its people ultimately and protect everyone on this earth by transitioning away from fossil fuels, the disruption will end there and then. If there's a roadblock going on in London and the government say we're going to start that transition away, those people will get up and they'll leave the road. That we have to get media attention and government attention. It would be wonderful if MPs and secretaries of state could actually get back to people on their letters and actually come together as a government and say, what, I just transition away from oil and gas, which supports workers, which reskills workers, retrains them, which supports the transition of infrastructure. That sounds like a really good idea. Let's do it. And it's the same with the insulation demand Insulate Britain made last year. It's a national insulation program. It's designed to help, the people who are struggling the most in our society. And yet the government, they didn't get back to those people on that. And it is a shame that the government are happy to stand by idle and stand next to the billionaires and the oligarchs. That is the reality we're in, unfortunately. And I think that is why disruption has to be caused, to challenge that. And like I said, all the other ways have been tried, and I don't think people would be blocking London's busiest roads if they felt like there was another choice. I know for certain I wouldn't have been sat on top of an oil tanker for 7 hours if I felt like there was another way to go about it. That is the only thing I felt in that moment of time that was going to make some sort of meaningful change.